Good morning. Welcome to Freeway Bible Study for today. I believe it's the 16th day of March 2018. My name is Kurt Bell. I'm your host, so to speak. Commentator, your reader, what am I? I'm not really reading. What am I doing? More like I'm, just sharing my thoughts about the Bible as I walk through it, from Genesis through Revelation. I'm a non-believer. Not only am I a non-believer of the Christian faith, I have no faith, at least not in God. I'm also a non-believer of just about everything, every religious faith. I'm a nun, as they would say on the census forms. But that doesn't mean that I'm not interested. If it turns out that God really is out there, I'd like to know that. If it turns out that any of the, thousands and thousands of potential gods that are out there, because for the most part we're all atheists, right? For one God or another, just atheists like me, as the old saying goes. We just go one God further. So let's jump into it. We're today at Genesis 15. Let's really quickly recap where we were with 14, just so we know where we are. So we're following the story of Abram and, incidentally, the story of Lot, his nephew, and also Sarai, Abram's wife. And in the last chapter, they had Abram had rescued Lot and all of the Canaanites, the inhabitants of Sodom, Gomorrah, and three other cities in the surrounding area, who had been taken prisoner by I forgot his name, Chezubedegba. It was a worthwhile effort to try to remember his name, but it looks like I can't. Anyway, there was a kind of a warlord of the surrounding areas, and who had taken them prisoner, and he, in the end, as Chekabadaba, or whatever his name is, was taking Lot and all the booty and all the other people back to wherever they came from. Abram runs in with his assembled men, and yesterday I said that they were 180-ish men, and I divided 180 and came up with 380 is the number, and I divided that in two and came up with some ridiculous number like 115. Anyway, never mind. Clearly I'm no math major, but the number wasn't 380, it was 318. So Abram walks after them, or runs after them, and with his 318 men, divides his army in the middle of the night, attacks the assembled armies or the sleeping armies of Chedabagaba, or whatever his name was, and anyway defeats them utterly, and reclaims Lot and all the goodies, and returns back to Canaan and becomes the hero of the Canaanites and all the assembled peoples there. Pardon me, excuse me, how gross. I'm going to make sure I lift my hood next time. It's a little chilly today. I'm sniffling a little bit. It's actually quite cold. So here we are. So now at the end of this, end of Genesis 14, I imagine that Lot takes up his home, his residence back there in Sodom, and Abram returns to his home, which is further south, in a kingdom that I can't quite remember the name. And we don't know exactly how much time passes, but I think we can gain, as the chapter opens, we can gain a pretty good impression that Abram's suffering a little bit of anxiety of some sort. Maybe can't sleep so well, as I do sometimes. I worry about life sometimes, and my wife tells me I mutter in my sleep. Anyway, it appears that Abram is having a sleepless night, and this chapter 15, which is a complicated chapter, there's a lot that goes on here, and it's a very high risk that I'll miss something. I literally read it and listened to it at least 10 times, which seems to be my normal number. I shoot for 5, and I usually exceed 10. And I think I've got the story laid out in my head. Basically, there are it all involves God's interview with Abram, or maybe I should say it the other way around. Abram's interview with God. God comes to Abram in first in his dream, in his mind, and then comes to him in person, and they have a little transaction. And there are two places where this happens, and it all appears to happen possibly in the course of a single night, although there's some complexities that would make that, technically difficult. I'll get to that in a second. And it happens first inside of Abram's house, and then outside Abram's house, and then back inside Abram's house. There's those two places. Here, come on in. There you go. A little bit of a squeeze there. So here we go. The chapter opens with God suddenly reassuring Abram that literally God says, I will be your shield, and I know he says shield and something about maybe being a protector. So it's like I'm picturing Abram kind of tossing and turning, maybe I know what he's worried about. He's worried about the fact that he's getting on in years and he doesn't have an heir, right? Which is a big deal. And he's got everything that he's got is going to go to his servant. And he names his servant, and I can't quite recall his name, but I know that the servant, strange, he says the servant was from Damascus, but then in the same breath he says that he was born in my own house. So does that mean that Abram once lived in Damascus? What is his name? Can't quite remember. It's a name that kind of sticks out. Of many, many names in the Bible, this particular name kind of sticks out, although I don't think we'll see anything from this name again. I don't know why this one sticks out, but anyway. So that's probably what he's worried about. Imagine Abram's, tossing and turning at night, can't quite sleep, worried that he's got no heir. There we go, sorry. And God suddenly appears, I think in his mind, he's talking to him and saying, don't worry, I will be your shield and your protector. And then Abram counters right back and says, but how can that be? I have no heir. My only heir is this guy who's like my overseer of my house. And God says, don't worry, I'll take care of it. And then Abram says, or maybe he doesn't say that, but Abram immediately says the same thing again. He says it twice. It's actually, and forgive me, I don't mean to be disrespectful, but after reading this several times, I kind of got the feeling that Abram's a little bit of a whiner, because God appears to him and tells him, I will be your shield and your protector. And then the first thing Abram's like, well, but how could that be? Well, I haven't got any kids. And we're going to see that later when God reaffirms his covenant for the third time. And we'll see Abram kind of whining again, wanting some proof. Interesting, because this is the patriarch of all patriarchs, right? Sure. He's a man, so I'm sure I'd be a whiner too. I'd be a sniveling. I'd be a sniveling mess if suddenly God appeared to me. What a experience that would be. So he's probably holding up much better than I would. So I should withdraw my my unfair criticism of Abram. So. Just real quick again, so Abram's kind of having a hard night, tossing and turning, who's going to inherit everything, all this stuff, and suddenly God appears to be speaking to him and telling him, don't you worry, I'll be your shield and your protector and take care of things. And then, Eliezer, sorry, I just looked it up, so I was faulty, I couldn't stand it. Eliezer of Damascus, that's the guy's name. And Abram says, the only person that I've got that will take care of everything is Eliezer of Damascus, and he's not even my son. He was born in my house. And God says, get up. This is where I think God actually appears, to pop down. So imagine like a father figure, talking to his son, and the son's not quite buying what he's saying. They're sitting around in the house, and the father says, okay, just get up, let's go to the garage, I'll show you. But instead of going to the garage, you're going to go outside. So God steps him outside and steps Abram outside, and it says they go abroad, so I imagine they're walking some distance away from the house, and God suddenly points up at the stars, and I really do think that he's with him, because the language, especially in the King James Version, the language really does read like they're walking out of the house together, which isn't unusual, because we're going to know that God's going to come visit Abram later in person. I think he's even going to wrestle with an angel, or maybe he's going to wrestle with God himself. So yeah, so it's no big deal if they're actually walking outside together, if you're going to wrestle God later. So they go out, and God, God's got this thing about comparing fecundity with, multitudes, whether that be the dust of the earth or the grains of the sand of the earth or the stars in the sky. And he points up, waves his hand into the heavens and said, "Can you count these stars? So shall be the number of your descendants." And this harkens back exactly to what God said already twice to Abram at his altar outside Bethel, where on the way to Egypt, God again first says, your numbers shall be as dust upon the number of the dust upon the earth. And again at the same altar when they're returning out of Egypt, he says the exact same thing, and now with the stars thing. So you see what I mean, kind of about the whiner. I mean, although I don't remember Abram necessarily whining earlier, but this one he's definitely got that air. So they're standing outside, and God, shows him the stars and says, "So shall be your number." And he says that your heir. In the King James edition, well, in the New International Version, it says your heir will be your seed. But in the King James edition, it literally says the one who will come out of your bowels. Well, I know we need to take a little artistic liberty with that, right? So let's not go down the wrong hole. No pun intended. No long track with that imagery. You know what I mean? It's from his loins. It's just interesting how translators can choose different words. Interesting. I guess what I'm aiming at is how in the world did whoever translated the King James Version come up with bowels instead of loins? Unless at the time of that translation in that area, bowels meant something different, which is probably the case. So. Anyway, I get off track. So he says, "I'll give you as many numerous as the stars." And he goes back. I think he's still standing out there. And now, what happens? I think he goes in. Yeah. The next part is that Abram says, he probably stretches his arms and says, "This is great. Thank you for reaffirming the covenant. I'm feeling much better." And wow, and how are you going to make me a father? I don't know, but I trust you're going to do it, Lord. So I'm going to go and get some rest, because clearly I'll need my strength later. So he goes back in, and I'm sorry to be kind of flippant and silly with this one. It's just I'm in that mood this morning. It's a good day. I got some important stuff to do, some good stuff to do today. I got a tough meeting ahead of me, and this is sometimes I use humor when I've got a challenging day ahead of. So forgive me if I sound a little less serious than I should in dealing with this weighty topic. So So Abram goes back in his house and goes to sleep. And God apparently, is still hanging around, because as soon as Abram falls asleep, God visits it says in the King James edition, a dread darkness, and I think in the New International Version, a terrible darkness upon him. And I think that means is he's bringing into a super deep sleep. And it's dread and terrible only because it's the product of the Lord, right? So which is a powerful entity. And in this dark sleep, imagine you can hear God. God apparently is relating to Abram a vision, a dream, in which he says, your people will go on to live in the land of another for 400 years, subject to those others, right? And clearly he's forecasting the enslavement of the Jewish people in in Egypt, right? The time of that, and he says, and eventually they will leave that land. He doesn't mention Egypt, but it's clearly that's what he's talking about. He says after that after 400 years, they will leave that land, with a lot of wealth. That's clearly a hint to when Moses will come, and Moses, being a descendant of Abram, will liberate his people from Egypt. And then they will wander, I think he says, does he say for 40 years? Or maybe I'm just pulling that out of my head. And they will come back again to this land to inhabit it. So that would take us to Deuteronomy, when Moses, after wandering in the desert for 40 years, was it 40 years? Climbs Mount Pisgah and looks out over the land, and I think he goes back down and brings up Joshua and says, "Lo, this land that you can see will be yours. Go now into it." And Moses knows he's going to die because he can't go there. His generation, that's why they had to wander for 40 years, because God disallowed them to enter the promised land until everyone from that sinning generation had died, and Moses, I guess, was the last of those. So what's happening now in Genesis 15 is a clear forecast of the Jewish people's subjugation in Egypt for 400 years. Their exodus, without any pun, exodus, via the chapter Exodus, from Egypt into the desert to wander for 40 years, and their eventual return to the land of Canaan, which is exactly where they are right now, to take it up. And that's when God's voice grows gravelly and thunderous, and he begins to list the names, not just that he will, Abram's seed, Abram's people will return to this land, but they will be masters over the races and the tribes and the people that live there now. And he goes on to list it, and literally you can just almost hear God's voice thundering through the pages. The Amorites, the Canaanites, the Hittites. I don't know if he says the Hittites, but all these ites. And I think he says the Amalekites. Am I saying it right? Amalekites, which will factor very weighty later. And that's when the chapter ends. And in my mind, when I finished reading that, I think the third time, the first time, again, it didn't mean much to me. I had to read it multiple times before it all started to kind of congeal into I could see the story. I could hear God's last words echoing through the Bible, the hills, the mountains of the Holy Land, echoing, "You shall inherit the lands of the Canaanites, he starts with a geography lesson. He says, from Mount something or other to Mount whatchamacallit, from the river of Jordan to the Sea of Galilee, or something. I can't remember. Part of me wanted to grab a map and of the old world and kind of plot it out and say, hey, he's just laying it all out. He's just telling exactly what Abram's inheritance is, and then I wanted to take that and superimpose the modern map of Israel over that to see if they match. I'm sure that's an exercise that's been performed by historians many times, and it would be interesting because I wonder if it matches. And then he says, so he gives the little geography lesson, and then he says, and this will include all the different peoples, the whatchamacallitites, the Hittites, not the Hittites, the Canaanites, the Jebusites, the whatever, and then it's kind of the chapter ends, and you can hear God's, sonorous tones echoing through the ages. And in my mind, I pictured that going all the way through Exodus, through Deuteronomy, Leviticus, actually ending in Deuteronomy, all the subsequent chapters, and finally winding up in Deuteronomy, which is, I think, where Moses, as an old man, finally struggles up Mount Pisgah, which I believe means summit in Hebrew. And I believe Pisgah, however, is an entire range. So it's like the summit range, imagine the summit mountains, and anyway, I think the mountain he climbed on is something different. Is it Horan? I don't know. Anyway, he climbs Mount Pisgah, and you can hear, and he looks over the edge to the promised land that he knows he will never enter, and you can hear the thunderous crackle of God's voice echoing all the way from Genesis 15, the prophecy of Abram now to be fulfilled through Moses via Joshua. Oh, it's beautiful. It's just, I mean, you know, Mr. Duncan, my high school English teacher, I think he'd be awestruck by the storytelling, right? I mean, it's really beautiful. And the one thing that really jumps out to me is that clearly this is not there. This is a big story. I mean, if this is an oral tradition, then this was a series of stories told over many nights at the campfire, and whoever came up with this was, you know, or maybe it was simply inspired by God. I mean, if you're a believer, but remember, I'm not a believer, so I believe these are human origins. You know, they're telling a story, and they're saying, yeah, tonight I'm going to plant the seed when I'm telling everybody around the fire, plant the seed about 400 years in subjugation. I won't say where, but we know I'm going to tell them it's Egypt later. Release, and then eventually return to the promised land. You know, and the storyteller is setting it up for, you know, next week. You know, we're going to see these other things after night of storytelling. Of course, that's how it would happen. I mean, any storyteller worth their weight, if they're telling a chapter a night in serial format around the campfire, they're going to do it in that very worthy way. Another thing that I noticed out of this chapter, and that's how that chapter ends, and so we're basically done. We've had how can I forget? Duh! I knew I was going to forget something, and I almost did. I almost forgot something really big. Remember the whininess of Abram? You know. But how will I know? So he keeps that up. So God says in this midst of this darkness, this dark dreamlight state, he says, I will give you all of these lands to be your own. And somehow, I guess he's asleep, or he's mumbling in his sleep, and Abram says, but how will I know? Well, he's got to be awake now, right? And I'm sorry again if I'm being so silly, but that's really how it comes up. I mean, if God told me, and I knew it was God, and he was telling me, I will make you a great nation, that would be enough for me. I would just, okay, sounds good, let's go for it. And I wouldn't ask for any proof, but Abram wants some proof. He says, how will I know that what you're going to say is really true? And God must at this point be going, okay. Okay, Abram, go out. I want you to get I think it's a heifer and a sheep, and they've got to be 3 years old. And I want you to get a turtle dove and a pigeon, and there's some other animal in there too. It's not a chicken; it's something else. I think there's 5 animals. Go out and get those, and then I want you to cut. Here's what you're going to do: go out to that open spot of land right there. You're going to cut in half the heifer, the goat, and the other animal. Is it a turtle dove? It's a turtle? No, that's a turtle dove. And then, if you're going to kill the turtle dove, that's one of a turtle dove and the pigeon. And I want you to take the halved animals and lay them out so the halves are right across from one another, and put a little space between all this stuff, right? So enough space to walk through, and then just don't cut the birds in half, but just lay the birds out too, and just do that. And so he does that, and then go back to sleep. Oh no! Before you do that, hang around for a little bit, because the birds of prey and the other birds are going to, the crows and stuff, are going to show up and want to eat this. You've just killed these animals, and they're just laying out there. They're not burnt offerings. They're just cut in half corpses. Just lay them out there and go to sleep. So he does that, and when I first read this, I was kind of dumbstruck, because I was like, what's all this about, right? Because I'm used to the burnt offerings by now, but this is something different. So I had to do a little research to try and understand what was going on, and I discovered that this appears to be an old Mesopotamian ceremony, that the cutting in half of an animal was used either as penance for wrongdoing, or so kind of an offering, but not really, or as to sign a contract. And there's plenty of evidence, apparently, through history of, for example, the great great building of a public works building or something like that in Babylon was put together, and to seal the deal or to mark the ceremony, they split open a heifer to do the job, or they cut off the head of a piglet. There's other cases, for example, where they would do things in penance. For example, an army might be defeated, and to cleanse themselves of their defeat, before they turn themselves over to the captor. There's one case where I think it's the Hittite ceremony, where they would in one particular battle, the Hittites lost, so they cut in half. What was it? I think it was a pig, and then a puppy, of all things. Gosh, who came up with that idea? It was like, if we got any animals around here, we can cut up. We need to do this thing, and someone's in the back going, I got a puppy. Yeah, okay. Gosh, who would have invited that guy on the pilgrimage? Jeez. But we didn't have anything else, so we used the puppy. And in that particular case, they also included a human. Oh, we gotta need one more thing. You there in the back. Yeah. Come on up. So this splitting of animals and humans in half and not burning them up, but just offering them a symbolic thing is an old thing. And what furthermore I learned to do throughout the Mesopotamian area was they would walk amongst it. For example, in that particular Hittite ceremony, they cut open the pig, split the pig, the puppy, and the soldier, and they laid out the halves of all of these. And then the Hittite soldiers walked between the yucky remains, and then went over to the river and kind of splashed some water on themselves. And then I guess they went over to the conquering army and said, okay, that's it, we give up, we're yours. or they would likewise do the same thing to sign a contract. So, and I think that contract thing, we don't know exactly if this is what was going on, but it sounds very similar. And probably this was kind of a contract thing. So imagine God sitting there and saying, I'm going to make a great nation of you. It's going to be great, more numbers than the stars, all the land from the mountains in the east and Jordan to the west and the river Jordan and all the way to the Dead Sea. And Abram's like, well, yeah, but how do I know you're really going to do this? And God says, okay, go out, get the what was it? The heifer, the goat, the something else, and then the turtle dove and the pigeon. And I want you to cut up the non-flying animals in half and lay them out with enough room to walk among. And then I want you to just lay the birds there, and then just hang around for a little bit and wave away the birds of prey and the scavengers, and then go back to bed. So he goes back to bed, and maybe I got things a little bit wrong. Maybe it's then when he goes back to the bed that he has that next vision. I think so. I think there's these 3 times in bed or something like that. It's definitely having a vision now. And here's the vision. That's it. This is when I got it wrong. Before, it wasn't the deep darkness. Before, I think he just went back to sleep, and that's when he had this dream. But now he's into sleep, and he's having a deep dream. Or maybe he didn't sleep at all until now. Maybe the earlier part happened while he was awake and standing around outside with God. Probably. But now he's definitely asleep, and that's when the deep darkness comes. And God, and in Abram's mind, or maybe it appears in fact, I'm not sure, comes 2 things: a burning censer, which is not, it's not like, censorship. It's like, it's like a pot that has like a smoldering incense in it, smoking out. Really popular in Japan. I used to see these all the times in Japan. They would have like outside the big temples in big cities like Tokyo, and they'd be smoking out incense, and you would come up and wave the holy purified smoke on yourself to kind of bring some good luck and purify yourself. So there was one of those that appeared, and then a burning, something like a little torch appeared. And it sounds like there's like a disembodied, invisible entity carrying these. It doesn't say that, but it just sounds that way. Otherwise, the fire and the torch and the smoldering pot kind of appear on their own, and they begin going through the remains of the slaughtered, the cut in half animals and the 2 birds, just like the Hittites did. Right, the soldiers walked among the cut in half puppy and the pig and the human. Likewise, so did this smoldering thing go amongst this things here. Hold on, I gotta sneeze. Maybe not. Hold on. Okay, I think I'm okay. So that's what happened. So I'm thinking, it's just not me, I looked it up. There's some speculation. I looked it up in the scholarship for the New International Version. Some scholarship says that although we don't know exactly what this ceremony was, given the background of the cultural context, and that anyone in that period, probably if they were contemporary and you're around the campfire and telling the story, and they said, you know, well, we cut the animals in half, and then the censer and the fire came, and those are represent like a, you know, purity in a way. Anyone would have got that as like, oh, okay, they're sealing the contract. It's like, you know, going down to the notar to get your document notarized, right? Yeah, it makes perfect sense, and that's where it ends. So that chapter ends there with basically the third, and I don't think the final time that God confirms his covenant with Abram. And of course we're going to see a little more later, because we haven't yet introduced the delightful practice of circumcision. But that's okay, because we can, you know, Abram hasn't had any kids or anything yet. So let's see what happens with that. And I think that's it for the chapter. Was there anything else? Hold on. Oh, yeah, one more thing. I've almost forgot. This is also the chapter where we get the first glimpse of the Jewish perspective on death. Excuse me. You know, Christians, of course, believe in an afterlife that where there's basically 2 places you go. Maybe, well, no longer 3. There used to be purgatory, but I think the Pope said that's not the case anymore. So there's heaven and hell, and we all know all about all that. But if you look it up, if you ask a Jew or ask a rabbi about it, they'll tell you a wide range of things. Everything from, you know, a simple, vague suggestion that you die, you sleep with the fathers, whatever that means, to everybody goes to heaven, and that it's just a matter of works and good deeds, how far along you go, that the goodness that you how good you are in this life, you know, better prepares you, not necessarily that you earn a reward, but that better prepares you to live well in the afterlife. But we get the first glimpse of this in this chapter when God tells Abram that your seed will go on and number as many as the stars. But you, Abram, you will die at an old age, and you will be buried, and you will sleep with the fathers. So that's exactly it. We've got the first sleeping with the fathers thing. And I don't believe that anywhere in the Old Testament is there any image or implication of hell, save that one section where I can't remember who it is. The one leader, they want to do something, and there's a group of people that say, no, we don't want to do that, and he says, okay, then I'm going to have the earth open up and swallow you up. And that's kind of an imagery of the people heading into a pit. Some people, I believe, use that to suggest that it's a suggestion of hell in the Old Testament. It seems like a stretch, because I think what it really is focusing on is the earth swallows them up. We don't really know what happens to them after that. I don't think hell really is introduced, and then even then, not very clearly until the New Testament with the lake of fire, and I think that's only like 1 or 2 times that's even mentioned. So there we go, and I wanted to point that out. There's a distinction between the Jewish and the Christian afterlife, and we get our first hint of it here. And with that, I think I'm going to stop. I've been talking for a long time. Thank you for joining me again for another day of Freeway Bible study. And in particular today, we covered the covenant with Abraham again. So the Lord's covenant with Abraham, that's what it's called. Take care, everybody. Make it a good life.